I call today's meeting of the Seclusion Working Group to order. We do have a quorum. We have a number of people present in person and a few online. First order of business on our agenda is to approve our previous meeting minutes. Hopefully everyone has had a chance to review the minutes from our previous meeting. And I would entertain a motion to approve the previous meeting minutes. That would have been the minutes of our meeting on November 5th, 2025. All right, we have a motion. Any discussion on the approval of the meeting minutes from November 5th, 2025? Seeing no discussion, all those in favor of approving the minutes say aye. Aye. Any opposed say no. Motion carries and the meeting minutes are approved. Next on our agenda. We are going to hear presentations from our members Jessica Heiser and Aaron Sandsmark regarding seclusion, its misuse, and I would say, I think I read some things on the disparate application of seclusion and other restrictive policies as well. So I will turn it over to you two whenever you're ready.
Hello, again, Aaron Sandsmark, Executive Director of Solutions Not Suspensions. We were asked to bring in some information to the work group, and after looking through the request made to us, we sent back, and if you look in your pamphlet or collection of packet of things, some testimony that the email that we sent back in kind of conversion to testimony that kind of breaks down defining of misuse or illegal seclusion, some gathering of data through there, and we'll walk through some specific points. But that is the grounding of our work today, and I hope that this can be an open discussion. Me and Jessica haven't, Ms. Heiser, haven't planned we stand here lecture to you all. It's more of a, as we talk through some points, we'll have discussion and have it open to everybody. Sound good? All right. Some things I just want to name right away. A big part of when we think about illegal seclusions and misuse of seclusion, we don't have a lot of clear data in Minnesota regarding either of those things, especially misuse. When we see misuse seclusion, we're really looking at disproportionality, and the reality is we're not gathering data on if the seclusion was quote unquote good or bad. It's a lot of times this is the seclusion that happened. And then there's a complaint process for those individuals that file a complaint process through MDE, perhaps go through the Disability Law Center, perhaps go to advocacy groups like PACER or places like SNS to get support for the things that they need. So I just want to name that. And for us, disproportionality to us is a misuse and is to us, and I think to a broader public, a big crux of the problem here, besides just the outright use of seclusion. So we will be going through some of that. Jessica, I don't know if you wanted to mention anything.
I did not prepare anything to testify or formal, but I can answer or kind of review some of the points that Minnesota Disability Law Center was able to pull from our records. Of course, when we think about the illegal use of seclusion, it can occur for a variety of reasons. So we've talked quite a bit about the use of seclusion in non-emergency situations or for disciplinary or non-compliance reasons. Seclusion that lasts too long, that doesn't end when the emergency is over, seclusion that takes place in a non-registered room, the parent or guardian not being informed of the seclusion, the registered room not meeting the physical specifications under the law, no one consistently observing the child while they are secluded, it not being properly documented, if it takes place for a child outside of the age limits, which currently is under grade 3, if meals, restroom, or water are withheld during the seclusion, or if the seclusion is conducted by someone who's not been trained on the use of restrictive procedures. So, as many of us know on this group, the illegal use of seclusion is a very broad term. It can encompass a lot of things. The other issue that we have, and I appreciate Erin's point about the challenges with finding illegal use of seclusion, is that it has to be reported. And that means that a family who believes that seclusion has been misused against their child, first of all, has to know the seclusion has been used at all. We have heard from families at Minnesota Disability Law Center that found out far after the fact or happened to stumble upon, literally physically in the school, walked into the school and found their child being secluded and hadn't been given documentation of that. So a family has to know about it. They have to know that there are legal rights around seclusion. They have to know that they want to pursue some sort of legal action. Then they have to have the resources to pursue that legal action. So time, money, language barriers, culture barriers all come into play there. And then they actually have to contact someone that's a legal advocate or an attorney and follow through with it.
So if I could interrupt you on that particular point, how would banning seclusion outright solve that problem?
I'm sorry, the problem of reporting?
Right, the improper use of seclusion that parents don't know about. How would banning it outright solve that problem?
I don't believe that our contention is that banning seclusion outright, K through 12, would solve the problem of having to report the seclusion. I think there are other solutions, potential solutions to that issue around the monitoring or schools reporting themselves. But of course, anytime a law is broken, there are times laws are broken that people don't know about.
Well, Ms. Heiser, we're here because there has been a tremendous push by organizations such as your own for a full ban of seclusion. In fact, you were successful in getting it done through the age of, or through grade 3. So my question is, with the goal of eliminating seclusion in Minnesota schools, how would that help address the issues that you've just brought up? For example, that it's misused, not in accordance with statute, of course, that would go away. It was misused for kids younger than 3rd grade, and parents don't know about it. So if we were successful in your goal to completely eliminate seclusion as a tool in the toolbox in Minnesota, how would it solve those problems?
If you'll allow me, I'd like to continue with the summary of what we have at Minnesota Disability Law Center, and then we can talk about the potential solutions towards what might solve those problems. Thank you so much.
Okay.
So when we talk about how we find out about illegal seclusion, because that was really the question at hand, was a question of, is there a singular place? Is there some data that we can pull that shows when illegal seclusion is used, where it is secluded, why or how it's used? There is no singular place. And so one of the things that we did at Minnesota Disability Law Center was we went back and looked through all of our cases. And essentially, when a family does think that seclusion has been illegally misused against their child, they could contact someone like the Minnesota Disability Law Center, although I'll tell you, I've been in a lot of rooms where no one had any idea what we were. They could contact a private attorney, they could contact PACER, they could contact any number of other advocacy organizations. A lot of times they contact the school because they're just really confused, and I see you shaking your head. Like a lot of times it's just, what do I do now? And so sometimes it's just handled internally within the school district. But of the ones that come to us at Minnesota Disability Law Center, we get about 1 case a month during the school year where a family approaches us and says that they have an allegation of an illegal use of seclusion in the school. As a reminder, Disability Law Center serves the entire state, so these come from all over the state. There's no real geographic propensity to these calls. They come from all over when we looked through them. There's no particular district that we always get calls from and districts we don't get calls from. All of those clients, at least over the last year, were boys with autism. Some of them also had diagnosis of ADHD, developmental delay, or emotional disabilities. Of the 5 clients, 3 clients were white, 2 were children of color. Of those 5 clients, 4 were age 10 or younger. So 4 out of the 5 would be considered illegal with the age brackets now. All of those clients' parents pulled them out of school following the seclusion for at least a period of time. Several went to homeschooling. And I think we heard that earlier as well from, I can't remember if it was maybe Minneapolis, but the question of like the parents that just pull their kids from school at that point after seclusion is used. And we may not know anything about why they were pulled from school. And our preliminary analysis, the lawyers and advocates at Minnesota Disability Law Center found that 5 of those cases, 5 out of 5 for the last school year would have potentially valid claims for illegal seclusion under the law. Only 3 of the 5 clients opted to pursue legal action. So even if they did have a case, a lot of them didn't pursue any legal action. And then that legal action could include things like MDE complaints, which I think we're going to hear from MDE, or some data here in our packet from MDE. It could include filing federal litigation, although that is incredibly rare in my experience. They could also file formerly with the Office for Civil Rights at the U.S. Department of Education. That is a different calculation now. And a lot of times they could file with the school district themselves. So filing a complaint either about the IEP not being followed or a Section 504 violation and try to work it out with the school. So that is just our law center. PACER, which is the Parent Advocacy Center and provides free services to families all around the state, they did report that a majority of their calls that they receive are about discipline and behavior, and a significant portion of those calls are about seclusion, but they don't keep hard records on their grants for those data as well. So the first problem I think we have is simply there is no easy way of determining when things are illegally secluded and when children are illegally secluded and when children are legally secluded. Probably the best outcome of that we have is that MDE data over the last 5 fiscal years. But when parents and families are obligated to exercise their own rights within the system, our reporting is always going to be underreporting. And we know that across the board for any law that requires the actual reporting of the plaintiff or the victim or whatever you want to use as language. So that being said, we did put at the end of our document some suggestions for data collection, and Senator Seeberger, this might get to your question about, what then do we look at? Some of the suggestions that we included, and this is really open for conversation, simply preliminary thoughts, because I think we could all as a group get on board with the idea of some sort of data gathering across the state to better assess this. One of the things we wrote was the identification of the school buildings or the identification of the staff or the student who is being secluded, along with the demographic information, which is some of what MDE already collects. But that might help us better be able to identify specific staff or specific school buildings that are overly relying on seclusion and potentially using it inappropriately or illegally. Reporting out the duration of the incident of seclusion. Most school districts are doing that anyway, but it's not publicly available through MDE. Potentially a checkbox on MDE complaints to kind of red flag them for restraint and seclusion allegations, so it's really easy to track those complaints. But those are all just preliminary ideas we had as we really struggled with how do you actually get your head wrapped around what is the illegal use of seclusion and what kind of qualitative data can we use, knowing we have a lot of, quantitative data. We have a lot of qualitative data. We've heard a lot of lived stories.
Oh, sorry. I'm just online, and I don't know if this is happening to anyone else, but it's going very in and out for me. I'm not sure if it's maybe Ms. Heiser going closer to the mic or far away, but we're kind of hearing half of what's being said.
Oh, that's good to know. Should I change anything? I feel like I've been pretty up here, but I can change something.
Is that a common experience for those that are online? Everybody's saying yes, okay.
When you're talking, Senator Seeberger, I can hear you very well. So maybe just something where the mic is positioned.
We're gonna do a little troubleshooting here.
All right, testing. I also might just be really short and these chairs go back quite a bit. That might be the problem too.
Just then I could hear you very well. So I don't know if you were talking closer.
That seems better. Okay, we switched mics. Maybe that's the secret ingredient.
Well, thank you. While Ms. Heiser gets settled in too, and I want to, for those online, please, jump in with any questions. I also wanted to name the different studies and packets of information we shared, kind of going to studies based, looking at misuse of seclusion when it is in regards to disproportionality and looking at who is affected the most by these outcomes. And I want to highlight a few things. We don't have time to read through every single thing here, and I hope some folks were able to check things out previously. But looking at, there's been civil rights data collection on the use of restraint and seclusion across, nationwide, and looking at those individuals that are most likely to be restrained. It is, pretty clear that students with disabilities, of course, especially in Minnesota, that is, primarily, of course, who is getting secluded. But nationally, that is, of course, the statistic. And then, of course, as we unfortunately know, students of color, specifically our Black boys, are extremely more likely to be restrained or secluded. In the study, now I have all of them listed, the titled Exploring the Disproportionate Use of Restraint and Seclusion Among Students with Disabilities, Boys, and Students of Color by Antonis, and I can't pronounce the last name, but it's from May 2020, Katsinisis. What I thought was remarkable is that Black students were 200% more likely to be restrained than their white counterparts, versus Hispanic students being 45% and so on and so forth. But I think
Sandra, can I interrupt you for a minute? I looked at that too, and my question on that point was, does that hold true for the state of Minnesota, or is this a national aggregate?
This is a national aggregate.
Do you have that data as it relates to the state of Minnesota?
That's a great question. Because of the way we've collected data in the state of Minnesota, we don't have the exact racial makeup of who is being secluded throughout the whole state of Minnesota. We have that for different school districts if they're reporting that out, but the aggregate of specifically Minnesota alone, no.
Do we know that there's a disproportionate impact on students of color when it comes to the use of seclusion in Minnesota?
I would suggest that, and I'm looking for MDE, but I would suggest that MDE's data that I'm really cognizant about my microphone use now. I would suggest that the MDE data that we saw, I think at our second meeting, which has been reflected in the restrictive procedures work group throughout, has consistently demonstrated that seclusion and restrictive procedures in general are used against boys with disabilities of color much more than any other group. And I think we even had a conversation maybe at our second or third meeting where, Ms. Holz, I don't want to attribute this to you. I think that you had said though, but that that makes sense because our level 4 settings have more children. Yeah, okay, you're shaking your head. Have more children of color, boys with disabilities, especially with autism or emotional disabilities. Therefore, it would make more sense that the restrictive procedure disproportionately applied in those settings.
Right, and I agree with that too. And I think we need to have a discussion as a legislature about why we have so many of our students of color in a setting 4. I think that's really the question, or a major question we have to examine. I don't know that we can tackle that within the confines of this working group, but I do think that's a real issue that somebody should dig into. Anyway, Ms. Sandsmark, we're still on this exploring the disproportionate use of restraint paper.
I just wanted to highlight that as this paper really goes into, a lot of scientific analysis around how they found the data, went through it, but I think it's really important for us to make sure that when something like seclusion is being used and we're seeing disproportionality at this kind of an extreme level nationally, and Minnesota, follows a lot of national averages, and when it comes to disproportionality, often we do worse, so on trend. So I just want this to be highlighted for consideration to make sure that we are not utilizing a tool or really considering the use of seclusion when it comes to disproportionality, because when we abandon children of different races and economic classes in our state over and over again and say that, I just feel that we are missing, when we've been talking about seclusion all in every single work group, I feel like we are doing a disservice to the majority of children that are being secluded by not speaking to the existence of their identity in the reality of the statistics. So I guess that's why I want to make sure that this was highlighted and seeing that disproportionality being identified.
And that disproportionality applies to students who are physically restrained also, true?
Absolutely.
Yeah, but we're not talking about banning physical restraint.
You want to? We can.
That's not what I was implying. Okay. I'm trying to keep us focused on the issue here, which is we're talking about seclusion, and nobody wants to. I think the disproportionality conversation is one that we absolutely should have, but I don't think we can have it in a vacuum. Recognizing, like you brought up, I think there's a disproportionate representation of students of color referred to Setting 3 and Setting 4 programs. And if we're talking about disproportionality, then physical restraint obviously comes into the mix as well. While we're still on this report, Ms. Sandsmark, I find it interesting that the authors conclude that restraint and seclusion should only be used for safety-related reasons, despite everything else. What are your thoughts on that?
I think the authors of the report acknowledge that there's not a federal ban and that these are going to be used anyway and in different states. And I think the data is showing that there's a large hesitancy of being able to utilize any of these procedures and putting stronger limits on them. I think it makes sense that they would say in a lot of ways, based on the data that they have and what they know of laws in the states, that it would be utilized with emergency procedures. However, I do think that the basis of this article is to provide clear evidence that usage should not be allowed over disproportionality, if that makes sense. That's my response to that.
I also just wanted to point out in our packet, a deep concern I have as a lawyer is that we have a lot of concern with the current and the past Department of Justice and Department of Education coming in and completely shutting down the use of seclusion and around districts and around states. Both Republican and Democratic administrations, and honestly, President Trump's administration as recently as 4 months ago, came in and completely shut down seclusion and the use of a district in a district entirely based on its overuse and disproportionality. And so the concern is that while we have decades of data demonstrating that seclusion is disproportionately used against boys of color with disabilities, we also have this national recognition of that change. And we've all talked about that. We've all talked about how we'd like to all use seclusion less. That's been really an open conversation. And so the idea that our state has made those steps in that determination, and we are down to, about 50 school districts in the state who still use seclusion, and a lot more school districts who have transitioned away from seclusion. The concern that we are on the right side here of where this is going and trying to find the resources available for the districts and the students in our state to make that transition in a responsible and in a smooth way. But the fact that we have a conversation at all around whether or not this is disproportionately used against students of color, whether or not that this is illegally and inappropriately used as a tool, that to me is no longer really a source of debate.
Ms. Heiser, can you clarify for me what you referred to in the beginning part of your comments about the Trump administration eliminating the use of seclusion from a district? I'm a little unclear on what your point was there.
I believe, I don't know if we included it or not, there's a Department of Justice from June 2025, I'd have to look it up, June 2025, where the Department of Justice came in against a Michigan, somebody correct me, Michigan school district, and completely eliminated the use of seclusion, informed them that they needed to immediately eliminate their use of seclusion, eliminate the seclusion rooms, and it was a agreement that had been reached after a complaint that if you go on the current Department of Justice website, as soon as I said that, they're going to change it because they change their websites daily. But the current Department of Justice website, I believe, outlines the current administration's work to eliminate seclusion. And really, it's in line with what the previous Democratic administrations have done too.
And so I thought I heard there was a concern with that action that they took. Is there some concern with them having gone in and doing that? Or I guess I'm looking for clarity as to where you were going with that initial point. I thought I heard this was the wrong thing for them to do.
No, I'm sorry if that was unclear. What my point is that if we have consistent federal administrations that are saying we need to shut down seclusion federally, if we have bills being proposed at the federal level saying we need to eliminate seclusion in all states, if we have other states, including southern states, Georgia and Louisiana, who are banning seclusion outright in their state, I'm really concerned about what Minnesota is doing in this larger realm of where federal administration is going, where other states are going. And it seems to me like the conversations that we might have are a backward step from the progress that we've already started to make.
Okay. Did the Michigan school that was shut down, does Michigan have the same kind of law that we do restricting the use of seclusion to emergencies?
Yes, ma'am.
Ms. Dansmark?
Thank you. I also, thank you, Jessica, for those really great points about federal mandates and decisions coming down. I also, Senator Seeberger, really wanted to come back to a question you asked earlier about what would change or how would banning seclusion affect disproportionality in restraints or seclusion specifically. That's what we're talking about in this hearing. We're happy to talk about restraints for a different work group if we would like to. But banning seclusion would make it so seclusion's illegal. So I would assume that disproportionality would be affected directly if children were not allowed to be put into rooms. So that, in its face, to me, is a big reason why it would be important for us to look at reducing seclusion for different grades. Currently, we have it banned birth through third grade, which has brought down seclusions by 40%, inevitably helping So a lot of kids who would likely have been put into seclusions are no longer put into seclusions. So to ban it,
Aren't we seeing a rise in restrictive procedures used at the same time? I recall data that came through saying, yeah, seclusions are way down because we banned it, but physical holds and injuries are way up. Isn't that what we're seeing?
I think we're seeing that from some school districts that have reported that directly, and some school districts that are here at this table. But that correlation data doesn't prove that it's a direct line from banning seclusion. And I have spoken to different educators.
Are you seriously saying that getting rid of seclusion doesn't necessarily correlate to an increase in physical hold? The events are still occurring. Is it your contention that we can't draw that correlation or be informed from that data?
I think it's a possibility. I think it seems clear that it could be an outcome. I also think restrictive procedures happen not just in the cases of seclusion, and restraints happen outside of just cases of seclusion. And there are a lot of reasons why physical holds are happening in schools. From what I have talked to with different educators, the seclusion isn't the only reason why there's an uptick in restraint from what I've understood. But I understand in this context, we are seeing an uptick. So I'm not trying to dissuade that. I am just saying.
Well, are we seeing an uptick in grades 4 through 12 as well? In physical holds and injuries?
I don't have that data in front of me right now.
Ms. Woodward.
Hi, thank you, Chair Seeberger. I'm listening, right? I'm doing a lot of listening, and I do not in any way, shape, or form argue that disproportionality is a concern, is a big problem. In many components of special education and our educational outcomes, disproportionality is a problem. Our Black and brown students are not faring as well as our white students in almost every area of measure, whether that's academic outcomes, federal settings, restrictive procedures. So we have a system-wide challenge with disproportionality that we are all trying to unpack and understand how to move through. So I just want to be so clear that there's no disagreement around the presence of disproportionality and the problems that disproportionality presents. I think one of the questions that I have is at the heart of the matter. What we're still talking about is emergencies and what happens in those situations where the threat of harm is so imminent and so substantial that our tools, like we run out of tools. And when I was looking at some of the research and I was reading some of the articles, a lot of what I was seeing was separating discipline from emergency and talking a lot about one of the problems that we need to address is reporting, is data, is what happens with that data. What does that accountability look like? And I'm curious if part of the solution, as we figure out what are the effective tools, because we haven't named that yet. And we are leaving schools and staff and students at great risk when we eliminate a tool without an effective replacement. And we are seeing increase in physical holds. We are seeing increases in partial days and home-based placements because we're running out of tools and people aren't safe. So I'm curious if there are, is this part of the solution if we're struggling to find good data so that we can intervene appropriately and actually understand, hey, in this building, yeah, it is extremely disproportionate. Oh my goodness, they are using it for discipline and that's not what we're talking about. So here's the intervention plan. Is that where we can focus energy, and will that help alleviate the concerns? Because I think putting all of the onus on solving the problem on our local school districts is really challenging. Because I don't know if you've been in one of these situations. I don't know if you've been in a public school standing there when this is occurring, but they are emergencies. And is this part of the pathway? And is that a reasonable pathway to focus on data and intervention when that data is problematic before banning it in the ways that we have?
Ms. Heiser or Ms. Sandsmark?
Thank you. I'm going to see how much I can talk about something you and I both know I'm going to talk about without talking about it. Ms. Woodward and I are bound by some confidentiality agreements, but I want to make sure that we honor that we've been in this situation before. And so I think to start with, absolutely, there is, and I said earlier, and you've said now too, like, we don't disagree that it's disproportionately used. It is disproportionately used. That's a system. That doesn't mean that any one particular person using seclusion is racist or sexist or ableist. It's part of the system. And we have to acknowledge that and honor that. And I am saying that sitting here as a white woman, that this is absolutely disproportionately used. And so that is something we can all agree on. I think we all also agree that it's really hard to track this, and that the onus should not be entirely on families, and the onus should not be entirely on school districts. That there has to be a way to have some data around when is seclusion misused, when is seclusion illegally used, that is not only solely based on a family filing a complaint or some sort of litigation. Ms. Woodward and I have been in a situation where seclusion was inappropriately used. And when we found out about it, there were significant changes made. And I wish that those significant changes could have been made without ever a lawyer being involved, right? And so is there a way to better get the data around when somebody is using seclusion for discipline, using seclusion too much, too long, et cetera, and how to better address that without the need for somebody to file a complaint? I think we are absolutely in agreement with that. We don't want this to be entirely on the families. We don't want this to be entirely on the schools. It has to be a collective system together, combating this system, because the system is disproportionately hurting our young boys of color. So yes, a lawyer's answer the answer is yes to your question.
So then it seems to me that part of the job of this work group is to get at the heart of that question. How do we identify this data? How do we do it so that the onus isn't on the parents solely or on the district solely? And if we do identify these instances, how then can the schools and the staff receive the support that they need so that the problem is addressed, so the parents don't have to go through the complaint process? It seems to me that that's maybe one of the big questions that we should start brainstorming on when we reach that part of our work group process. I throw that out there. Ms. Sandsmark.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. I also just wanted to your statement, Ms. Woodward, and to what Ms. Heiser said as well, I also think it's just important for us to, as we talk about disproportionality, as we talk about the burden of Black and brown children and Black families, and to continue to say that and blame, yes, and it's true, the system is rigged against so many of our families and so many of our young children of color. But the idea that we would, and I'm glad that we're going to talk about, correct data collection and making strides to really understand the numbers. I've heard in so many, either talking about seclusion or other different parts of the education system, and just talking about, oh, that is a problem. We hear that's a problem, with a lack of intent of real policy change or systemic change. We've seen some of it over time, but I think to have a conversation over and over again that we all agree it's great, but that's not making an action moving forward. So for us,
But Ms. Sandsmark, here we are. We are a work group formed to tackle this particular issue of seclusion. So now is the time to have these conversations and to develop policy or recommendations for policy to addressing the disproportionate use of seclusion on our students of color. I think doing that can open the door to further conversations down the road when it comes to disproportionate referrals to setting 3 and setting 4, and the general overall disproportionate use of punishment and discipline in any setting of education on our students of color.
I completely agree and glad that this work group exists for that reason. I wasn't speaking to this work group being created to not have that conversation. I'm just saying the way it is perceived, or the way I'm feeling, I guess, as an individual, hearing all the ways that we know it's wrong and kind of debating and kind of getting stuck on that point of agreement without next steps has been a frustration. But I agree, looking at data collection and understanding where it's happening more clearly is going to be deeply important, especially for the communities that are most affected. So thank you.
Ms. Woodward?
I think there have been ideas brought to the table. We have brought solutions. I think, we've left meetings to feeling, I remember us talking, well, we could look at the IEP. Well, IEP process is too complex, and that's not parent-friendly either. And, well, let's look at, could we have a runway? Nope, it feels like we're not in agreement. We know that. Like, we're agreeing on this, but the focus isn't disproportionality. The focus is, in emergency situations, is there a pathway to keep people informed and rights secure and data strong? And what is that? Is there a way to improve technical assistance? But I think, we're all bringing these lenses, and we are bringing ideas. I just even said, could a solution be us looking at data, looking at different interventions? What other options do we have to mitigate disproportionality? Is banning the only option? And I just don't think that it is. And I would love for us to be able to look at some of these potential solutions to say, okay, that could greatly help. That could greatly impact this. That would address the concern about parent involvement. This would address the concern about discipline versus emergency. There have to be other things to consider. So I'd love to start talking about what some of those things could look like.
And that is the plan. Yep, we're moving in that direction. Ms. Winship?
Thank you. Yep, along those lines, I'm looking in this research report, and at the end, in the conclusions, it says, a recent review identified 11 interventions explicitly designed to reduce restraint and seclusion. For example, the relationship-based crisis prevention curriculum uses a cognitive behavior intervention approach to change adult perceptions of student problem behaviors, alternative approaches to addressing those behaviors, and identifies specific instances when and only when restraint and seclusion should be used. I'm curious what the 11 interventions are that they are saying are explicitly designed to reduce restraint and seclusion.
Ms. Sandsmark or Ms. Heiser?
I think if Sue was here, and maybe Greta wants to speak up, but I think if Sue was here, she would point out that there are about 15 years of data with the Restrictive Procedures Work Group and MDE reports that list all kinds of ideas for interventions and different ways of reducing restrictive procedures. So it's not really a question of, do the ideas exist? Because they're there. We're swimming in ideas. I think the question now is there the money, the training, and the will to put them into place?
I think there's the will. we're here, there's a work group. And certainly it's been an issue that I've been working on for the last couple of sessions. And to sort of piggyback off of what Ms. Woodward said, that's been a huge source of frustration for me too, was I've been trying to craft legislation to get at the particular problem or problems, and have been met simply with either resistance, no, I'm not going to listen, that's not a real concern, this is the actual concern, the only thing we need to do is ban it. And in crafting the legislation that I introduced last session, finally, only then did I start to feel like the parties were actually coming together to talk about real solutions and real things we could do to address concerns. And so I want us to be mindful of that particular mindset as we move forward. What I had hoped we would hear today is some information on instances of like the problem. What is happening with seclusion? Why is there this push to ban it? Disproportionality, yes, that exists. But it doesn't get to the fact that these emergencies still happen. I was hoping to hear or gather data on, gosh, in greater Minnesota, they just don't have the resources, so it's being used as a disciplinary tool because staff simply don't have the training. And I didn't see that in anything that I reviewed. Or we have particular districts where this is a pattern we're seeing, or this is a pattern we're seeing. And really what I'm seeing is that it has to do with maybe a lack of recognition or understanding of what seclusion is, a lack of recognition or understanding on the part of a parent as to what kind of notices they're entitled to, an attempt by school districts to follow the notice and IEP provisions but not meeting the mark. And it's really what I've seen is a matter of the need for additional training and funding, which as a part of the legislature, we can do. I think I would like us to go into the next phase of this work group, the problem-solving phase, in that mindset to understand where could we get the most bang for our buck, where could we do the most good? Because seclusion as a disciplinary tool has been banned for years, yet I'm hearing it still happens. Seclusion has parameters around it, yet I'm hearing those parameters are disregarded. So that leads me to the conclusion, if we ban seclusion altogether, it's still gonna happen. We're not gonna solve the problem. How do we solve the problem? What supports do we give to the school districts and the schools and the staff to ensure that when emergencies arise, our most complex and highest needs kids and students are handled appropriately with dignity and in a productive manner so that they can continue to grow and thrive. Sorry, I don't know where that all came from, but I didn't mean to interrupt you guys.
I just want to question the paradigm of what you just described is concerning to me, because the idea that it's going to happen no matter what, and therefore banning it is not an effective approach, feels really counterproductive to me. That's the same argument that people have made against all kinds of legislation, that people are still not going to wear their seatbelts, so we should not force seatbelt use. Well, most data demonstrates that people do follow laws. And so the fact that we have data demonstrating when seclusion was banned K through 3, seclusions in K through 3 went down is a direct representation of when you forbid something from happening in our schools, it tends to happen less. On top of which, when it is banned in K through 3, and then it happens in K through 3, MDE immediately knows this is illegal, and it's a red flag to us that we really need to look into it. So I just want to question the paradigm of it's going to happen anyway, and therefore we can't ban it or can't do anything about it. That to me is a counterproductive paradigm to go into it with.
I think you misunderstood me. My point was I would like us to focus on action that will really impact the outcome, that will provide the school districts and the schools and the staff with the support they need to identify the problem. If it's a lack of training, initiate some sort of policy or program that gives them the training and the dollars that they need. If it's a lack of staff, do the same thing, not to simply ignore what's going on, impose a restriction without addressing those additional needs. That was my point. And I'm sorry I interrupted you during your presentation. Who's next?
I also, thank you, Chair Seeberger. I wanted to also identify, or I guess, in thinking about solutions, thinking about, current law, what we could change, what things that going forward, my organization does not believe in the use of seclusion. However, the law is currently that there's a ban for our youngest children, but it is allowed in research in emergency procedures, in emergency cases for older students. And is there a reality where we see implementation of mandated types of training, mandated alternatives to seclusion, where we're actually funding those alternatives, and really attempting to make it a pathway towards a full non-use of the use of seclusion? I think that would be an interesting thing to talk about. I would be curious about what that would look like. I would also be curious, but if we were to consider that, what is a timeline on that? I'm just spitballing that out loud. I, of course, in my leadership role at my coalition, we don't want to see any use of seclusion, but there is a current legal use. And if there could be a guarantee of a down the road, seeing in law that it's, that we see steps taken towards a full non-use or full ban, I think that could be interesting. But I understand the need to put into practice. Senator Seeberger, you're mentioning a full ban without supports. That's not what we're talking about. I'd love to see supports. Also not using seclusion, but we could talk about funding and supports in alternatives. That's just something I'm thinking about, but I'm happy to speak to that or speak with everybody about that who are experts in the rooms.
A bill was dropped in '24 for a full ban. And it was never heard in committee. There was a bill for a complete ban through K-12 of seclusion. Yes, that was the conversation. That is what led to this working group. And in fact, the ban through K-3 is what led to this working group. And it's been the inability of the stakeholders to come together on this issue that led to this working group. So yes, there's been a tremendous push in this state for a full ban up through grade 12. And in fact, the 23 legislation directed the Commissioner of Education to come up with recommendations for an urgent, immediate, sooner rather than later, full ban up through grade 12. That has been the conversation up till now.
Yeah, I don't know if we're.
Ms. Woodward.
I think there's a lot of interest in that conversation. So we've heard a lot. I just want to draw a connection to something we've heard and something we've implemented locally. We've heard a lot about UKERU here in this room. And when, as a district, we adopted UKERU as a system, the conversations we were having and that we had with that company was they were like, we really don't need to use restrictive procedures anymore because this is so effective. And in my head, I was like, this is amazing. Like, if we could someday not need to, no one likes to do this. So we would love to not have to use restrictive procedures anymore. And then as we were exploring that implementation further, the question was like, well, if we do UKERU, should we continue with CPI, which is our restrictive, that's what we use for physical holds? Should we still do that? And the answer was yes, because we're not going to take that tool away while we're working on implementing this fully with fidelity and really seeing the impact. Our hope is that 10 years from now, magic wand, these supports are so effective that we don't have to use CPI anymore, but we're not there. And I think that's the whole crux of the issue right now is Wouldn't it be wonderful, right? Like, imagine a world where we don't need seclusion, we don't need restrictive procedure, we don't need kids to be arrested from school sometimes because we cannot gain them under instructional control and it's not safe. That would be an amazing world, and I think we all want to live there, but we're not there yet. So even in our system where we don't have registered seclusion rooms right now and where the law is banning them K-3, there have been times when people have used it out of desperation for a moment. So I think like that is, how do you build the bridge to get there where then all of a sudden we see all of our data start to go down because we're using the right tools. And that's the part that's been missing this entire time, is allowing us to get something implemented with fidelity, to see the data come down because we're on the right track. That's what everybody wants. So that's what I would just like, really like, is there the willingness? 100%. Is there the capacity? Questionable. But we can talk about that. Is there the funding? Not yet. So I think that's really what we're needing to talk about, because that's what I would love to see before that's why I think we're running up into a barrier, is because when we ban something without something else, people are getting hurt.
And that's the crux of the issue, I think. What spurred me forward in 2020, after I learned in 2023 there was this ban up through K-3 that was never discussed. And that's, I think, where there was an enormous disconnect and an enormous missed opportunity to have the conversations we're having now, or continue the conversations that were begun in the Restrictive Practices Working Group, to get to a place where schools feel supported, families feel supported, and we can start developing and incorporating the right tools. Who had a question? Ms. Chose had a question.
Hi, I know that the sound's kind of going in and out, so I hope everybody can hear me. I have been doing a lot of listening over the last few sessions since I joined, and I know somebody, but it's hard for me to tell who was speaking, talked about what Sue would say at this point. I spent a lot of time with Sue talking about this before I joined this commission, and as you know, she's retired. But that being said, I really appreciate whoever just spoke, and I apologize, about this, what we all, and I've been thinking and listening to, what are we all in agreement on and what areas are we not agreeing on, really trying to get to a succinct point, as is everybody, I think. And we all are all in agreement that we would like to not have to use seclusion, not have or not use seclusion. That would be the ideal state. And what Sue would say, and what I'm saying now in NAMI's position, is that those supports need to be in place. And so thinking about, how we do that with the mindset, I think the frame of mind or perspective that is ultimately the goal. I think everyone would like to use that less. Yeah, so I just wanted to comment with someone saying what Sue would want. Definitely we need those supports in place, and to figure out how we move in that direction. It seems there's impacts where we eliminated K-3 and other indicators are moving up, and the issues are still happening. And so I think it sounds like we are all in agreement that what we need are supports. I know there's some who'd like the ban, but certainly we can't do that without supports. And Sue was really clear on that as well. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Dansmark, Ms. Heiser?
Thinking of how to consolidate the stuff we agree on. We all agree that we want to stop seclusion. We all agree that it's disproportionately used. And we all agree that we don't want more restraints, more law enforcement. Nobody wants that. So there's a lot we all agree on. What it sounds to me like is the real crux of the matter is ban versus gradual. And I was not in the state when there was a lot of discussion and advocacy around the K-3 ban. I understand that there was a compromise between birth through 12 and then no ban at all, and then it came back and everyone agreed on K-3. I was not here for that, but I understand that those discussions were had, and that what I'm hearing from the school districts is that the ban, although it had about a year and a half ramp up, it didn't come with the supports that are necessary in your view to ensure that that ban can be successful. And so the K-3 ban that we have in place now was about a year and a half ramp up. Ms. Woodward, I heard you say, you know, I'd love in 10 years to not use this at all. And so I guess one of my questions is, when we're talking about immediate bans versus gradual implementation, and also knowing that there's not a lot of money out there right now, with the collective goal of stopping seclusion, what does a reasonable timetable or a reasonable support look like in your mind? Because from the families that we represent, you know, 10 years means their kid's out of school. And so every single minute counts to a lot of those families. And I know you all recognize that too, and you all appreciate that too. So I guess my question is, if we're thinking along the lines of, we all have the same goal, but there's this question of how fast and with what supports does that come into play, what would your ideal look like? Is it 10 years, or is 10 years just something you threw out there? Okay, you threw out there, okay.
Ms. Woodward.
I think no one's gonna like what I'm gonna say. It depends. I mean, you know, I'm looking at the presentation from the Minnesota Department of Ed from several meetings back. And, you know, it talked about findings from the work group. Number one was the recommendation to prohibit the use of seclusion. Number two was consideration of direct resources or funding opportunities to schools to obtain training and systematically intervene. And that, number two, didn't happen universally. There are competitive grants for non-exclusionary discipline and things like that, but we've got big disproportionality in terms of districts and the access that they have there when it's tied up in competitive grants. Greater Minnesota systems like my own don't tend to fare as well as larger districts and agencies in those types of structures. So I think it's hard to say, you know, 3 years sounds great or 5 years sounds great, because we don't know what supports will look like, right? Again, I used that READ Act analogy many meetings ago, but that was, here's your funding to pay your teachers, they're going to this training, here's what they do, here's the exact approved universal screening tools that you can use, and here's the exact approved, you know, curriculum you can use. That was the state putting their money where they wanted to see effort. So if this is such a huge priority in these spaces, what does that look like? And how do we get there? I don't know. Because we're facing some big barriers in special education around funding. So my hope, like I said, with like Ukeru, for example, is that this is our initial implementation year in some of my programs. So then we're going to be, moving into fuller implementation next year, and we're going to be working on fidelity and that's any new intervention. It takes time to work. So I'd love to say in 3 to 5 years, like we see super mega drops in our data around restrictive procedures. But I just don't know. It just depends on the resources that we have available.
Ms. Hulse, did you have a comment?
Yes, sorry, I have a giant computer here. I'm just going to shut it so that hopefully you can hear me online. Just a clarification about that recommendation. I was part of the work group at that time. That was not the majority of the work group that agreed with that recommendation to eliminate seclusion. Just want to make that clear. Also, I just want to bring us back to the reality of eliminating seclusion. If we do choose to eliminate seclusion, if that is our reality, going back to the lessons that we've learned from the K-3 ban, I think we need to be realistic about what other data we will see shift. If we lose seclusion as a tool, we need to be prepared to see a spike in physical holds. We need to be prepared to see a spike in calls to law enforcement, calls to EMS. So I do think we need to think about this globally as part of a larger system. I recognize that our issue right now is seclusion, but this is part of a larger system, and this is ultimately about students and staff being safe at school. I know we are talking about a myriad of issues that surround seclusion, and we do agree on disproportionality being a problem. We do agree on misuse being a problem, but I do take us back to the fact that the issues still occur. And in setting 3 and setting 4, they often occur multiple times a day. This is a tool that we use in emergencies. And so when this goes away, we do have to contend with what do we do in emergencies to keep kids safe. And we do see that increase in all of those other negative actions, and then increases in home-based placements. And so it's a sticky wicket for us to contend with as a work group. So I just want to keep that context kind of front of mind.
All right, Ms. Heiser.
Yeah, can I ask genuinely, I cannot find data from other states that have banned seclusion K through 12 and the results with either increased law enforcement, increased homebound placement, increased restrictive procedures. I genuinely can't find it. Are you aware of any states that we should be looking at for that?
Ms. Hulse?
Pick a state. This is where education is the way that it is in the United States, right? Everybody does something a little bit different. The short answer is that all the systems look different, and the systems of support, especially for children's mental health, look so very different across every state system that what is available to you as a student with significant needs outside of the school system can really dictate what your options are when school isn't working for you. In Minnesota, and again, to quote Sue, I wish she were here, but we really never fully built the children's mental health system here. And so de facto, school is that system for the vast majority of students. So when school gets to be a really tough place for you, you really don't have many options here in this state. And that's a terrible shame. We pride ourselves on being a really socially responsible state and having all these wonderful services, but for kids, we struggle. In a lot of other states, you have access to county-based placements, you have access to private placements, you have access to all sorts of different systems and supports that can serve you and provide FAPE when public school systems cannot. We don't have that type of safety net here. And so parents, kids, schools, advocacy groups, we find ourselves between a rock and a hard place when you are a student with autism or EBD, and you just have these really big behaviors that really aren't working in a school setting. Look at Virginia, look at Tennessee, look at California. They have these county systems that can come in and help. We just don't have that.
Ms. Woodward.
One of the things we've been talking about is data and like difficulty in getting any of the data to tell us the story. So I can't, I don't have exact quantitative data where I can pull from to show, but what I can tell you is that locally, our numbers of partial day and home-based placements is increasing. We're lacking capacity for building, setting for programs that meet the need in our area. So there's this downward kind of pressure on school districts. We can only have so many kids in a setting for program before it becomes unsafe. And so we have wait lists across the state for these kinds of programs. I had a conversation with a leader from our county recently, and she is expressing concern because in the county, they're seeing this uptick in partial days and home-based placements. And, she was just trying to understand, the county's frustrated with the schools, like, why is this happening? And we were saying, well, we're just everything Kate just said. And then she was sharing how they were trying to make residential placements, and those were getting declined at the state level. And so we're all just stuck. So we are locally seeing these trends, and I also can't tell you exactly what state to look at and how to get to that data, but I can tell you what that looks like locally, and that is the conversation happening across MACE is concerns with increases in these different types of placements where kids aren't getting a full day access to school because it's simply not safe for them to.
Ms. Halls.
Intermediate district spans Dakota County and a tiny bit of Hennepin. Right now, we don't have any day treatment provider at all in Dakota County. I know the county has put out multiple times a request for proposal. We can't get anything built. Meanwhile, we have had a waiting list for the entire duration of my employment in Intermediate District 917, and this is year 5 for me, and I know it far predates my employment there. I know the same is true. We do the best we can. Staffing is hard. Luckily, we have amazing people that want to work with our amazing students, but this is our reality. So it's just, again, it's part of this large system where you're constantly trying to move the right levers to serve the students and to serve them safely. But, and I don't mean it as a sob story, it's the reality. So just want to add that.
Ms. Sandsmark.
Thank you, Chair Seeberger. I also I appreciate the points being made, especially what we've seen across the board in previous presentations. I'm thinking last time we were here, just the immense amount of mental health supports that are needed for our young people, especially right now. It's numbers that we haven't seen before. So I just want to acknowledge what we're seeing in your districts as well as across the state, across our country is astronomical of what our children are desperately needing. And the idea that we're going to reduce funding for special education outright is insane to me, but I know that's not everything that we can affect here. I just want to name that, and I am in agreement there. I also wanted to look at, we talked about, just to bring in some other data and looking at a little bit of what MDE brought, if that's okay. There was a list of different districts that had registered seclusion rooms, and looking through, it was individual cases that were brought through MDE of complaints about illegal use of seclusion or misuse. These districts were found in violation, and of the 50 districts that have registered seclusion rooms, 15 have been found to have been in violation over the past 5 years. So that's 30% over the last 5 years that we're finding misuse or illegal use of seclusion. I think that's a good number to look at for something to even further for us to look at, okay, so 30% that are utilizing seclusion are falling out of compliance or using it illegally or in a misuse, whatever semantics we'd like to use. So I think that's another, yeah.
And to clarify, Ms. Stansmark, you're referring to the list of 15
Yes.
districts?
Yes.
And I did take the time to go through these complaints, and what I saw when we're talking about misuse or findings on the part of MDE, they were, what I found is maybe a lack of training, a lack of understanding of barring egress with a mat. Oh, that's seclusion. Oh, okay. And the violation was you were barring egress in a room that wasn't a registered seclusion room and didn't meet the requirements. Okay. That seems to me like something that training could address and additional supports and interventions could address. Something where the school didn't hold an IEP meeting timely enough after a use of seclusion was a violation. That again would be training and coaching and supports. What I was more, none of these seem to rise to such an egregious misuse of the procedure that it would merit a whole other discussion. I think one concern I had was with the particular district, and it wasn't even having to do with the use of seclusion, but it seemed like this district was completely out of its depth in dealing with the student at issue, where in a transcript of a conversation, the special ed director recommended that the student return to their home district. And so to me, that signals that this particular school, whatever it was, I don't know, simply wasn't set up or didn't have the staff or the training or the ability to meet the complex needs of this particular student. That to me was the most concerning thing that I read in all the complaints. What a question? MDE is here and would like to speak too, so maybe we'll turn to that part in our agenda. So MDE did submit information to this working group on the misuse of seclusion. The data was submitted and posted to the working group website and includes a list of 15 local education agencies from 2020 to 2025 with violations related to seclusion. 15 decision letters also were included and posted to the working group website. And Megan Ariola will be present for questions, and I would invite you to speak to the importance of the context of each complaint and violation and provide us with any insight or additional information.
Thank you very much, Senator Seeberger. For the record, my name is Megan Ariola, the Legislative Policy Manager for the Minnesota Department of Education, and I'm glad that we've already set a lot of the context that I would have otherwise been giving around the data collection at hand here. So to Ms. Sandsmark's point, the information submitted in the packets this time were districts that were found to have been in violation of Minnesota statute 125A, governing restricted procedures and seclusion. So a violation of that statute doesn't necessarily mean an improper use of seclusion. It could have been an improper application of a seclusion room, like Senator Seeberger just mentioned, the thing about the mats on the wall, or there were other opportunities that we identified where seclusion would not have had to be used had this intervention happened. So most of these decisions won't come out right and say, seclusion was not supposed to be used here. What they will provide is recommendations for how you could avoid this in the future. So 15 districts out of 50 with registered seclusion rooms were ones that were found to have misused seclusion in any manner of ways, which may not necessarily speak to a simple number like 30%. Because we're dealing with such complexity amongst the narratives, I think each of these are about a couple dozen pages long because there's transcripts and investigations that go into them, which is also why it's hard to just do the simple quantification of one-to-one, this situation to this situation. Because there's a lot that goes into these proceedings, and there are different rights that students have if the statute under Minnesota statute was violated versus if a student's IEP was violated versus if a student had a violation of their rights under Section 504. So while these things may all fall under the same statute of law, the protections that the students might have been denied can fall into a number of different areas there. So thank you for letting me correct the record. This is a very policy wonky kind of breakdown, and I appreciate the opportunity to comment.
No, absolutely. It's very, very helpful. Ms. Sandsmark.
Thank you so much for that clarification so I can understand the data better that MD is collecting. I'm curious too, we talked about, I think broadly, the complication in finding quantitative data in particular because of just the way data is collected broadly in the state, but also because of data privacy for young people. And I'm curious, was that, there's all the documents you sent. I know MD was working on providing some of this data for a while. I'm curious to understand a little bit more about when we report data out, what are the things that have to be considered in regards to child protection or data protection, why it might be difficult for us to get the numbers that we want to see. I'm just curious, what are the guardrails?
Ms. Ariola.
Absolutely. Thank you for the question, Ms. Sandsmark. So when we are talking about any sort of data coming from the Department of Education, we are beholden to the same chapter of law as the rest of the state of Minnesota, Chapter 13, which governs data privacy for citizens generally. And there are also a number of education-specific privacy protections that exist not only at the federal level, but also in our state Student Data Privacy Protections Act. So when we talk about student data, what we really get down to when we talk about difficulty sharing raw numbers is the idea of personally identifiable information. So this standard is something where if you were presented the data before you with demographic or district level information at numbers that are at such a low level that a reasonable person familiar with the situation could identify the individual student or parent. So when we talk about why it took us so long to put this information together is because every single complaint decision, we have to go through and redact every piece of personally identifiable data. And that does make it difficult to say, well, districts in greater Minnesota, for example, are struggling with using seclusion rooms properly because we would have to redact the district name so that the student could not be identified, especially the smaller we get into in a district, the more specific the circumstances get. If that is in violation, there are a number of rights that individual Minnesotans, including minor students, have to civil egress or to address their rights being violated in some manner or another. So it's a question of not only liability, but also protecting the information of students who I don't need to say for the record how intense, traumatic, and overwhelming these situations are. Nobody would want to have that compounded by having their name be known by somebody who shouldn't have known that they had this really tough circumstance happen. And so it does get a little lawyerly and wonky, but I think that's why we, in our annual report around restrictive procedures that we do have to publish, we try to provide that distinction between restrictive procedures, physical holds, discipline, and seclusion. Because while in the common parlance, those words may all feel like they say the same thing, when it comes to the rights under federal and state law, those all mean very different things, and why it's sometimes better to talk about physical holds as a type and classification of data versus being able to whittle it down to seclusion. But I understand that does present some of the frustrations that we've seen here where it's like, well, it'd be really nice if we had these numbers. And especially when we get down to some of these like single instance numbers versus another, it does have the question as well of like, well, personally identifiable student information, supports available in that district, and how do you really quantify one situation in Minneapolis with one situation in Grand Forks? It's a struggle, for sure.
I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions from members of the working group, either with regard to the MDE data or anything that we've discussed here so far? Ms. Heiser.
Thank you, Chair. Megan, I just have a very quick question. On the list of 15 school districts, or the 15 LEAs that had violations found related to seclusion, are those 15, how do I ask it? Are any of those duplicate offenders, or is every district just listed once?
Ms. Ariola.
For the purpose of the set of complaints that we have before us, each district there's only one complaint tied to that district on the list. There were some complaints that we were not able to include because of, in conjunction with testimony from earlier committees, would have resulted in some personally identifiable information potentially being shared about a student. So the list of actual districts, I think it may be one or two more, or there may be a second instance in one of the districts, but not another. That's just a level that we really couldn't, we felt like we couldn't share without some of those data protections being in place.
Ms. Heiser.
Can I have a quick follow-up? Thank you, Chair. So just to make sure I completely understand, because I have not diligently read almost 400 pages of those complaints. If I was to read almost those 400 pages of complaints, I would not necessarily find 15 individual school districts. I might only find 13 or so that have been redacted, and then a couple of maybe missing complaints where the district is listed on this 15, but not necessarily would I find a corresponding complaint.
That's accurate.
Thank you.
The LEA name in these cases is something that could be used to be personally identifiable.
Ms. Woodward.
I think one thing as a special ed administrator that I just want to note is complaints aren't always a bad thing, because as a special ed administrator, I don't always know that something may have occurred in a classroom, in a building across, my entire system until a parent exercises their rights and files a complaint. And it can be a very good tool for us to nip something in the bud, proverbially, to take care of a problem like you referenced. And like one small correction, we were, in the case we were sharing but not sharing earlier, Ms. Heiser, we weren't found in violation of seclusion. There was a misunderstanding, a misinterpretation of what is seclusion and what is not seclusion in that case, and the MDE found that we were not in violation, but we were in terms of restrictive procedure use. And then that did initiate some substantial changes, like you said. Like this happened? We don't want this to happen. So we changed things like right there, and it's provided lasting and positive change across our system. And while we do hear horror stories, the special education leaders that I know across the state fall much more into that camp when we're aware of a problem and it comes to our attention that we want to fix it and address it and prevent it from happening in the future to the best of our ability. And so I just think that it's important to note the power of these complaints and that it doesn't necessarily indicate negligence on the part of a district. It's a problem that occurs in one pocket of, might be one missed meeting like we've seen, and the law is pretty clear. And so then we have the opportunity to fix it moving forward. And in many cases we do, and it helps us make the system better. So I just think that side of the coin when we think about complaints is really important to keep in mind as well.
And if I could just make one comment before I will step aside and folks can talk, we can talk after if folks would like, is in the decisions, you'll see a number of recommendations that we provide districts. And this gets to some of the larger questions that folks were talking about around like the system and the wraparound supports, is because we know that a student doesn't just go to school with just the special education teachers. It's a school environment, and we know that it's better for all students if you're implementing things like multi-tiered systems of supports, positive behavioral intervention services, some of those things that are about the school culture, and not necessarily we need to make sure that the special education teachers have this specific training. It's that the school knows how to deal with dysregulation before it gets to the emergent point of seclusion. So the complaints really do lay out a number of areas where the investigator will go through and say, at this point, this intervention probably should have been used and it may have diffused the behavior. At this point, that intervention probably should have been used and it might have diffused this behavior. So as we talk about like the shared goals that I think this committee's done a good job of identifying, that's part of it, is like, how does the school be ready to welcome every child and what is happening everywhere the student goes as part of their education. So I appreciate the opportunity to make those comments. Thank you.
And thank you for sharing the information. I did read through the complaints. they were hard to read as a parent who had gone through that and lived that for so many years. In a way, I mean, it was a little bit re-traumatizing for me because a lot of those really tough situations I lived through, and I was the parent at the other end, and I was the one attending the IEP meetings. And it's, it's one thing to read it on paper, but it's a whole other thing to live it and to be the parent that comes in or is called to come pick up your kid or to come in for the IEP meeting. It can be really emotionally difficult. So I want to acknowledge all the parents that are going through this with the help of staff. There were days I would see the phone ring and I'd be like, not again. So some of this was really hard to read for me, but I plowed through all of it. And what was notable to me too on some of these was just how much the school staff did to try to address the concern. Okay, this happened, so we tried this, but then this happened, so then we tried this, but then this happened, but then we tried this, and then we didn't schedule the IEP meeting in time. Okay, so some of these was not for lack of trying and not for lack of trying to adhere to the statutory requirements. One school district I did have concerns with, but for the majority of them, it was, I think, painted a really nice, painted a good picture of just how complex some of these incidents can be and how flexible and adaptive staff have to be to best support these students who have highly complex needs. Any other comments on the materials that we reviewed and had available to us today? All right. I think we had some good discussion today. I think we worked on hopefully honing some of the issues. I appreciated the listing of where we agreed. And hopefully I feel like we're starting to generate some ideas of where we go next. So what I would like us to do, I'm going to give us homework, of course. And I would encourage everyone to read all the materials that were disseminated today. I went through all of them. They were all very helpful. So I'm going to ask you to submit written ideas for the working group to consider as recommendations to the legislature. Email them, please, to my partner here, Andrew George. And kind of the idea here is to take these ideas. I kind of want to, let's start assembling all our ideas. Where do we go from here? Now we're at the where do we go from here part of this. Let's start assembling all these ideas. And what I would propose is at our next meeting, which is December 1st, at our first December meeting, whenever that date is, we'll start to discuss the submitted ideas. And then in subsequent meetings, we'll refine and vet our ideas, turn them into recommendations, ultimately with the idea of proposing a draft for the legislature. So we're in that space now where we can just start throwing ideas out, and hopefully we can have some really good and productive discussions in our future meetings. Any questions or comments on that plan? All right, I want to thank everyone for their really good work here today. Our next meeting is when?
Madam Chair, members, our next meeting is December 10th at 2 p.m. in this room. And the second meeting in December where we'll continue to refine and discuss those ideas is December 17th at 2 p.m. in this room as well.
All right, I want to wish everybody a happy Thanksgiving. Stay well. And with no further business before this working group, we are adjourned.